The house smelled different. New smells, strange smells, unfamiliar sounds. It was overwhelming at first, but to Max, the golden retriever who had only recently lost his sight, this was just another part of his world. He had learned to rely on his other senses, his nose, his ears, the subtle shifts in the air. He had learned to navigate without seeing. Max sat quietly in the living room, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the soft chatter of his new family. There were voices in the kitchen, laughter from the children, and the occasional creak of the house settling into its evening rhythm. It was a place of comfort now, but it hadn't always been this way. His journey to this moment had been a long one. Max had once lived in a bustling city apartment, his world full of sounds and smells he could remember with ease. But as his sight faded, the world grew more challenging. His owners, unable to care for him any longer, had made the difficult decision to bring him here, this new house with this new family. It had been a week since Max had arrived, and in that time he had learned more than he ever thought he could. He had learned the feel of the hardwood floors under his paws, the way the sunlight warmed the rug in the sunroom, and how to follow the faint smell of the children's shoes, to find them wherever they played. Max's new family was patient, kind, and understanding. His owner, Clara, had always spoken to him in soft tones, guiding him through the house with gentle commands and the occasional reassuring touch. But it wasn't just Clara. Her children, a boy named Noah and a girl named Emily, had quickly taken to him, giving him plenty of space and time to get used to everything. They were careful with him, always making sure to keep obstacles out of his path and offering him treats when he successfully navigated a new part of the house. But it wasn't just Clara and the kids who were learning about Max. They were discovering something about him that they hadn't expected. Despite being blind, Max was more independent than anyone had imagined. He didn't need to be led around every corner, every doorway. He navigated the house with an almost surprising confidence. One morning, as Clara prepared breakfast, she watched from the kitchen as Max moved across the living room. His tail swished behind him as he carefully stepped over a small rug, turned to his left to avoid a chair, and trotted towards the kitchen, sniffing the air as he neared. It was a dance he had mastered. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're something else, aren't you, Max?" Max paused for a moment at the kitchen entrance, tilting his head toward her voice. His nose twitched as he detected the smell of the pancakes she was making. He stepped forward, slowly but purposefully, his nose leading him the rest of the way. His soft paws padded quietly on the tiled floor, his movements fluid, natural. "You're not even looking at me, and you know exactly where I am," Clara marveled. She set the spatula down and crouched to gently rub his head. Max leaned into the touch, closing his eyes in contentment. He had learned to trust her touch, to trust the family's scent, even without the ability to see them. Max's confidence grew with each passing day. The house, though new and unfamiliar at first, was beginning to feel like home. Every scent told him a story. The smell of the laundry room, where Clara's perfume lingered in the air. The sweet scent of the children's rooms, mixed with the faint scent of crayons and books. The outdoor air, cool and crisp as he stepped outside to explore the yard. One day, while Clara and the kids were out in the backyard, Max ventured into the living room, where the sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long golden streaks across the floor. He knew this spot by heart, the warmth on his fur, the slight draft from the window, and the comforting silence of the room. He made his way to the couch where he often napped, but this time he circled around the area, listening, taking in the small shifts in the air, and then he paused. Max tilted his head slightly as he sniffed the air. He could smell something faint, a new scent that didn't belong. His ears perked up, and he stepped cautiously toward it, taking in slow, deliberate breaths. The scent was coming from the corner of the room, near the bookshelf. He moved toward it, his nose twitching as he reached the source. There, tucked beneath the books, was a small, forgotten toy, a squeaky ball that Clara's daughter, Emily, had left behind earlier in the day. Max could feel the shape of it with his paws, a soft roundness that brought him a familiar sense of comfort. He nudged it with his nose, and it squeaked loudly in the quiet room. Before he even realized it, the sound of the squeak drew Emily's voice. "Max, is that you?" Clara and the children had returned from outside, and they stood in the doorway, watching in awe as Max proudly carried the ball in his mouth. He trotted toward them, tail wagging. He dropped the ball at Emily's feet and looked up at her, his body quivering with excitement. "Well, look at that," Clara said with a laugh. "I guess he found it all by himself." Emily bent down, her hands gently rubbing Max's ears. "Good boy, Max. You're so smart." Max sat down, his tail thumping against the floor, content with the attention, but also pleased with himself. He had done it. He had found the toy, not by sight, but by memory, by scent, and by trust in his own instincts. Clara smiled at the scene, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for this dog who had brought a new sense of joy to their home. She couldn't help but be amazed at how quickly Max had adjusted, how much he had learned, and how much he was teaching them in return. "Who needs sight when you have a nose like that?" Clara mused, watching Max settle down beside her on the couch, his head resting against her leg. Max's world might have been darkened, but the love and warmth of his new family, his new home, was more than enough to guide him. He didn't need to see to know that he was loved, and that was all he needed to know. The morning sun filtered through the window, casting soft rays across the living room floor. The house was quiet, except for the familiar hum of the refrigerator, and the faint sounds of birds singing outside. Max was already awake, as he always was, his ears alert to the smallest noises around him. The soft rustle of the curtains, the creak of the stairs as someone moved upstairs, it all told him the story of the house, of the people who lived in it. Clara had gone out for her morning jog, and Emily and Noah were still asleep. Max took a deep breath, his nose flaring as he took in the scent of the house. There was the rich aroma of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen, the hint of leftover soap from the laundry room, and, of course, the comforting smell of the children's rooms, where the faint traces of their scents lingered from the night before. He knew the layout of the house now, not by sight, but by memory. He knew the soft texture of the rug that lay at the foot of the stairs, the roughness of the tiles in the kitchen, and the smooth, polished feel of the coffee table in the living room. His world was one of sounds, scents, and tactile experiences, and he had come to cherish it. Today, however, was a special day. Clara had promised that they would go to the park later, and Max could feel the excitement building in the air. He had learned what the park meant. It meant open spaces, freedom, and the chance to run without restrictions. He loved the feel of grass beneath his paws, the breeze in his fur, and the freedom to explore. Max stretched his legs, letting out a small yawn as he slowly got to his feet. He made his way to the door leading outside, pausing for a moment to listen for the sounds of Emily or Noah. But the house remained quiet, and Max, confident in his abilities, nudged the door open with his nose and stepped outside. The backyard was familiar. He had spent plenty of time here already, learning the scents of the trees, the flower beds, and the small patch of dirt where Emily and Noah often played. But today, he had a purpose. He wanted to explore beyond the fence. He wanted to know what lay on the other side. Max's ears twitched as he heard the faint sound of a car door opening. His head turned towards the driveway. Clara was back. He could smell her familiar scent, a combination of lavender and the fresh morning air, and he felt a wave of comfort wash over him. He knew she'd be happy to take him to the park, and he was ready. The park was his favorite place, a place where he could run and stretch his legs without being confined by walls. Before he could get too excited, he heard the soft padding of footsteps approaching. Emily, her small feet making their way through. The house had woken up and was coming downstairs. Her scent was fresh and sweet, like the smell of the bed linens that had just been washed. She came into the backyard, her hands brushing against the doorframe as she stepped outside. "Max," she called softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Are you out here?" Max's tail wagged as he trotted toward her, his paws light against the ground. He could hear her movements clearly, the soft shuffle of her slippers on the patio. When he reached her, he sat down and lifted his nose, sniffing the air. He knew that Emily had just woken up, her scent still carrying the faint trace of sleep. It was comforting to know she was here. "I think it's time for a walk, huh?" Emily said, her voice full of energy as she knelt down to give Max a scratch behind the ears. Max closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, enjoying the familiarity of her hands. He loved the way she always seemed to know where to pet him, how to calm his nerves. Emily's hands were soft, her touch gentle as she slipped on Max's harness and attached the leash. "Ready to go, Max?" she asked, and Max's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. He could feel the leash tighten slightly, a signal that it was time for their daily outing. Max stood, his tail wagging in anticipation. Emily giggled at the sight, her fingers brushing against the leash. "I think someone's excited," she said, giving him one last pat on the head. "Let's go then." Max trotted beside her as she led him through the yard and toward the front gate. He could hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath her feet, the familiar sounds of their neighborhood slowly coming to life as they made their way toward the park. Max didn't need to see to know where they were going. The scent of the trees grew stronger as they approached the park, the distant sound of children playing filling the air. He could hear the faint rustling of leaves and the gentle breeze brushing through the grass, and he could feel the subtle shift in the air as they reached the entrance to the park, the space opening up before him. He stepped onto the soft grass, feeling it cushion his paws. The smells here were different, fresh and vibrant, filled with the earthy scent of nature. Max sniffed the air deeply, his nose twitching as he took in everything around him. He could hear the sound of birds chirping overhead, the rustle of bushes as a squirrel scurried by, and the distant sound of children's laughter. It was a symphony of life, one that Max had come to love. Max trotted forward, his nose leading the way as he explored the park. He knew the layout by heart. There was the old oak tree in the center, its bark rough beneath his paws, and the small pond where he could hear the ripples of water. There was the flower bed with its sweet, fragrant blossoms and the picnic table where the family often sat. But today, Max had a new goal in mind. He could smell something, a faint scent of another dog, one he hadn't met before. His ears perked up, and he turned his head in the direction of the smell, his body tense with curiosity. "Max!" Emily called from behind him, her voice soft, but filled with concern. "Where are you going?" Max gave a soft woof, his tail wagging as he trotted toward the scent, his steps steady and sure. Emily followed, calling his name again. But Max was focused now. The scent was stronger, and he was determined to follow it. A few moments later, he rounded a corner and came face to face with another dog, a golden retriever, much like him, but younger and more energetic. The other dogs sniffed at him, tail wagging as they greeted each other in the way only dogs can. Max's ears relaxed as he stood still, allowing the new dog to approach him. He could feel the excitement and curiosity radiating from the other dog, and for a moment he simply enjoyed the interaction. Emily caught up with Max just then, her eyes wide as she saw him standing still, meeting the other dog's gaze. "Wow, Max," she said, her voice filled with surprise and admiration. "You found a friend." Max's tail wagged, his body still but calm. He had found his way, not by sight, but by scent and memory. And in this vast, new world, it was enough. The days passed with a comforting routine. Each morning, Max woke early, alert to the soft sounds of the house as it came to life. Clara's footsteps on the stairs, the quiet clink of her mug as she poured coffee, and the children's laughter as they got ready for school. Max had come to know these sounds, and they brought him a sense of peace. His world was slowly expanding, not through sight, but through memory, scent, and sound. Max had learned that the house, though large, was filled with places he could navigate confidently. He knew the layout by heart now. The kitchen, with its smooth, tiled floors and the sharp smell of cooking, the living room with its soft carpet where the children often played, and the back door leading out into the yard, where the fresh air greeted him every day. But there was still one thing Max hadn't quite adjusted to: the stairs. The stairs leading up to the second floor were a challenge for him. Every day he would stand at the bottom of the steps, his nose sniffing the air, his ears twitching at the sounds of footsteps above him. He could hear the children's voices as they moved about their rooms, but the stairs themselves seemed like a strange, daunting obstacle. Clara had always been patient with him, coaxing him gently up the stairs with a soft voice, a guiding hand, and the promise of treats. But Max wasn't sure. He had tried climbing them once, only to feel the disorienting sensation of slipping midway. The unfamiliar rise and fall of the steps beneath his paws had thrown him off balance, and he hadn't tried again since. But today was different. Clara had gone upstairs to check on the children, and Max, standing at the bottom of the stairs, felt a strange surge of determination. He had learned to trust the house, to trust his instincts, so why not the stairs? His nose twitched as he caught a faint trace of Clara's scent above, her lavender perfume, the soft trace of her presence that seemed to linger around her. He could hear her footsteps on the second floor, steady and familiar. He knew she was up there, just a few steps away. With a deep breath, Max took a tentative step forward, lifting his paw and carefully placing it on the first step. The cool, hard surface met his paw with an unfamiliar sensation, but he didn't hesitate. He had been through much more challenging moments before. He could do this. Step by step, Max moved upward, his nose leading the way. He could feel the subtle shifts in the air, the slight incline of the stairs beneath him. His heart raced with each step, but he pushed forward, focusing on the familiar smells that told him where to go. The scent of the wood beneath his paws, the slight echo of his footsteps in the quiet house, the soft sound of Clara's voice coming from above. By the time he reached the top, Max was panting with excitement, his body trembling slightly from the effort. He stood at the top of the stairs, looking out into the hallway. He had done it. A soft voice came from above. "Max!" Clara called, sounding surprised but pleased. "You did it!" Max wagged his tail, turning to look at Clara, who stood in the hallway just a few feet away. She knelt down to give him a pat on the head, her hands soft and gentle. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice full of warmth. Max felt a wave of satisfaction flood through him. This was a victory, not just for him, but for Clara, too. She had believed in him, and now he was beginning to believe in himself. The next few days felt like a turning point. Max had made it up the stairs, and now he was starting to explore the second floor with more confidence. The children's rooms were a new adventure. Emily's room smelled like fresh sheets and crayons, while Noah's room had the scent of his sports gear and the faint traces of his favorite snacks. Max loved to sniff around, exploring every corner of these new spaces, his paws padding softly on the carpet. But it wasn't just the rooms that intrigued him. Max was starting to feel more comfortable in the house itself, with all its creaks and groans. He had learned to trust the familiar sounds, the soft whir of the ceiling fan in the living room, the gentle hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the sound of the family's voices as they went about their day. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Max lay quietly at Clara's feet, his head resting on his paws. The familiar smells of food filled the air: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and freshly baked bread. Max's nose twitched at the scent, and he felt a rumble in his stomach. He had come to love these meals, the rich smells of the kitchen, the gentle clink of silverware on plates. As the family ate, Emily reached down and scratched Max behind the ears. "Good boy, Max," she said softly. "You're getting so much better at finding your way around." Max looked up at her, his tail thumping against the floor. He had come so far in such a short time. From the moment he had arrived at this new home, he had been uncertain, unsure of his place. But now, with each passing day, he was becoming more and more a part of the family. He had found his rhythm here. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Clara sat on the couch, reading a book. Max lay beside her, his head resting on the soft cushion, content in the silence that surrounded them. The house had quieted. Down for the night, the only sounds now the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant rustling of the trees outside. Max had always been aware of the world around him, but it was now that he began to understand the deeper meaning of his journey. The family had opened their hearts to him, giving him space to grow and trust again, and in return, Max had learned to trust them, his new family who had never once given up on him. As Clara gently rubbed his head, Max let out a contented sigh, feeling the warmth of the home around him. He had made it through the hardest part of his journey, the part where trust had to be rebuilt, where he had to find his way in a world that had been dark and uncertain. And now, with the love of his new family, Max knew he had a place where he belonged. He closed his eyes, content, knowing that no matter what came next, he would face it with the strength of his trust, the memory of the steps he had already taken, and the unwavering scent of love that surrounded him. Max woke to the familiar sounds of the morning, the soft shuffle of feet as Clara moved about the kitchen, the rustling of the newspaper, the clink of a coffee mug being placed on the counter. The air was filled with a familiar comfort, the kind of peace that Max had come to know in the days since joining Clara's family. His senses were alert, attuned to every sound, every scent, every movement in the house. He stretched, feeling the warmth of the soft rug beneath him, and padded slowly toward the kitchen. His paws made light, measured steps on the smooth floor, avoiding the occasional stray toy that the children had left behind. Max could always find his way around, no matter how many toys or obstacles lay in his path. He had learned the house well, each corner a familiar scent, each room a space he could navigate by memory and instinct. Clara smiled when she saw him enter the kitchen. "Good morning, Max," she said, her voice warm and comforting. She bent down to scratch him behind the ears, her fingers gentle as they brushed through his fur. Max closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the touch. It was a reminder of the bond that had slowly formed between them, a connection built on patience and trust. The smell of bacon filled the air, and Max's nose twitched. Clara was making breakfast, a special treat for the family. He could already imagine the taste of it, the salty, crispy bacon, the rich aroma of eggs sizzling in the pan, and the soft warmth of toast. His mouth watered slightly, and he moved closer to the kitchen counter, hoping Clara might drop a scrap for him. Clara laughed softly, reaching down to give him one last scratch. "You're so patient, Max," she said, her tone playful. "But no bacon for you just yet." Max's tail wagged as he backed up a few steps. It wasn't that he expected the bacon. It was just that he knew Clara, knew how she had become a part of his daily routine. Her mornings, her gentle movements, her soothing presence. It was a rhythm that Max had come to understand and appreciate. Clara finished cooking, and soon the rest of the family trickled into the kitchen, Emily and Noah looking bright-eyed and ready to start their day. They greeted Max with smiles and soft words of affection, and Max responded in his own way by wagging his tail, nudging their hands for a pat, and giving them a joyful bark or two. It wasn't long before Clara handed each of them a plate, and the family sat down to breakfast. Max settled quietly by Clara's feet, his eyes watching every movement as the family ate. He didn't need food to feel content. The simple presence of his new family was enough. As they ate, Emily leaned down to Max, her face glowing with a soft smile. "Max, you're so good at this," she said, her voice filled with affection. "You've become a part of our family." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor. He didn't fully understand the words, but the feeling behind them was clear. He had found a place for himself here, in this home, a place where love and trust flourished, a place where he wasn't just a pet, but a companion, a family member. And in that, Max found comfort. He had been given the chance to heal, to grow, and to trust again. After breakfast, the family went about their daily activities, with Clara and the children heading to school and work. Max stayed behind, content to remain in the warmth of the house. The house was still. The sounds of the outside world, cars driving by, birds chirping, the wind rustling in the trees, filled the air. But Max was at ease. The silence of the house had a comforting quality. It wasn't empty, it was simply quiet, a space where Max could settle into his own rhythm. The familiar smell of Clara's lavender perfume lingered in the air as she moved around the house, her footsteps light as she went from room to room. Max could hear the soft rustling of papers as she worked from home that day, the occasional sound of her typing on the keyboard, and the subtle clink of her coffee mug being set down on the counter. All of it, each sound, each movement, told Max the story of the day. But there was something new today, a small change in the rhythm of the house that made Max's ears perk up. It was a sound he hadn't heard before, a subtle scraping sound that echoed faintly from the living room. Max stood up, his nose twitching as he followed the sound. He knew the house well, but this was something different. As he padded toward the living room, he was surprised to find a small object, a cardboard box, sitting in the middle of the floor. It had a faint, unfamiliar smell, one that he couldn't quite place. Max sniffed it carefully, taking in the scent, his head tilted in curiosity. The sound of the front door opening brought him back to reality. Clara had returned early, and the door swung open with a soft creak. Max turned to face her, and his tail wagged slightly at the sound of her footsteps. Clara walked in, holding a small potted plant in her hands. The fresh scent of flowers filled the air as she set the pot on the windowsill. "I thought I'd add a little color to the living room," she said, smiling as she glanced at Max. "What do you think?" Max sniffed the air, drawn to the new scent. The plant had a fresh, earthy smell, and it was a welcome addition to the house. Clara leaned down to give Max a gentle scratch behind the ears. "I thought you'd like it," she said. "It's a gift, just like you." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor as he stood there, feeling the warmth of the moment. He didn't need to see the plant to understand what it meant. It wasn't just about the flowers, it was about the care, the attention, the little things Clara did to make the house feel more like home. For the first time in a long while, Max felt the full weight of belonging. This was home, this house, these people, this rhythm of life. He had found his place, his safe space, and in that moment, Max knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks stretched on, and Max continued to settle into his new life. Each day, he grew a little more comfortable, his world expanding through the small moments he shared. With Clara and the children, his senses had sharpened, allowing him to map out the house in intricate detail. He could tell where everyone was by the sounds of their movements, the scent trails they left behind, and the way they spoke to him. Always gently, always with love. But today felt different. Clara had woken up early, the usual sounds of the morning, routine missing. Max, who had become accustomed to the rhythms of the house, noticed her absence immediately. Her scent, the gentle shuffle of her slippers, and the clink of her coffee mug were all missing. He sniffed the air, a twinge of worry curling in his chest. He padded to the kitchen, but the space was empty. No one was there. Max's ears perked up as he heard the soft murmur of Clara's voice coming from upstairs, but it wasn't the normal, comforting sound he had come to expect. Her tone was different, gentle but tinged with something else. Concern, maybe. Anxiety. Max padded to the bottom of the stairs, his nose twitching, his paws restless. He was familiar with the layout of the house, but this was new. He had never sensed Clara so off balance before. He stood there for a moment, his head tilted as he listened, his fur prickling with unease. The stairs loomed in front of him, the familiar climb to the second floor. He had conquered them before, had come to see them as nothing more than a few simple steps leading to a familiar place. But today they seemed different, more daunting, as if something was waiting for him at the top. Max hesitated, his paws planted firmly on the ground. His body yearned to climb, to check on Clara, but there was a part of him that felt uncertain. The sound of Clara's voice reached him again, clearer now, but it didn't soothe him the way it usually did. Something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, Max stepped forward, his paws moving slowly up the stairs, one step at a time. He trusted his instincts, the same instincts that had guided him through countless challenges. The world had become a place he could navigate through memory, through scent, and through the unwavering bond he had with Clara. He would not falter now. When he reached the top, he paused at the hallway, listening intently. The house was quieter than usual, the sound of Clara's voice now muffled, but the faintest hint of distress lingered in the air. Max moved forward, following the sound of her voice as it drifted from the bedroom. His paws were light on the floor, his every movement careful as he approached the door. He could smell Clara's scent clearly now, the warmth of her perfume, the trace of fresh soap on her skin. But there was something else, something unfamiliar. Max nudged the door open with his nose, and the moment he stepped inside, he found Clara sitting on the bed, her head in her hands. Her shoulders trembled slightly, and though she was quiet, Max could sense the heaviness in the room. He padded over to her slowly, his ears flat against his head, and sat down beside her. His presence, though small, was constant. His fur brushed against her leg, and Clara's hand instinctively moved to rest on his back. Max could feel the tension in her fingers as they ran through his fur. "Max," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." Max's tail gave a gentle thump against the floor, his body leaning into her touch. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew this. Clara needed him, and he would be there for her, just as she had been there for him. Clara continued to stroke his fur, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was grounding herself in the familiar presence of her dog. Max stayed close, his head resting on her lap as she whispered her fears aloud. There was something weighing on her, something that Max couldn't understand, but he could sense the hurt in her words. "I've been thinking about the past," Clara said softly, her voice distant. "About everything I've lost, about what comes next. I don't know how to move forward sometimes." Max tilted his head, watching her closely. Though he couldn't know the details of her pain, he understood the emotions that swept through her. He had learned the language of silence, the way emotions carried in the air. Her sadness, her uncertainty, the weight of her thoughts. They were all tangible to him. With a gentle nudge, Max placed his head against her hand, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't need words to offer comfort. He simply needed to be present. Clara's eyes softened as she looked down at him, her fingers still gently tracing the lines of his fur. "You're the only one who's been here for me," she whispered, "through everything." Max felt a surge of warmth flood through him, the meaning of her words settling deep within him. He had not been with Clara from the very beginning of her journey, but he had become an integral part of it, a constant presence in her life, and now, as she faced her own struggles, he would be there to help her find the strength to move forward. She leaned down to kiss the top of his head, the gesture soft and filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Max's tail thumped lightly against the floor again, a silent promise that he would never leave her, no matter what. The house was quiet now, the storm of emotions within Clara subsiding, but still lingering in the air. Max remained by her side, a comforting presence that grounded her, reminded her that she was not alone. He had learned to trust her, and now, through patience and gentle connection, Clara was learning to trust him in return. The days following Clara's quiet breakdown felt like a turning point. Max could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house. It wasn't that things were perfect, nothing ever was, but there was a new kind of peace settling over them both. A soft, steady rhythm had begun to take shape, one that intertwined Max's presence with Clara's healing process. Each morning, Clara woke up a little earlier, her steps lighter. She didn't move through the house with the same sense of urgency she once did. Her actions felt slower, more deliberate, as though she had finally allowed herself to breathe again. Max noticed the change, but it was the small things that spoke the loudest. The gentle touch of her hand on his fur, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him, and the long, quiet moments they spent together, just existing in the same space. Max's routine had shifted too. He no longer felt the heavy weight of anxiety pressing down on him, the uncertainty that once dominated his every move. Instead, he was able to focus on the simple joys of his life. Long walks, playtime in the backyard, and the quiet afternoons spent napping by Clara's feet as she worked. It felt like he had found a new purpose in his life, one that wasn't defined by the past, but by the moments they shared now. Today, however, was different. Clara stood at the kitchen counter, a soft hum in her throat as she prepared breakfast. Max lay in his usual spot nearby, watching her closely. He had grown accustomed to the gentle rhythm of her mornings, the way she moved about with the grace of someone who had learned to take her time. But this morning, there was something new, a spark in her step, a subtle energy that Max couldn't quite place. Max's ears perked up as Clara placed a steaming mug of coffee on the counter and turned toward him. She had a small smile on her face, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "Max," she said softly, her voice warm, "we're going on an adventure today." Max's tail gave a quick thump against the floor, a flicker of curiosity igniting within him. An adventure? He was familiar with the term. It meant new places, new scents, and the thrill of the unknown. He hadn't been on an adventure in a long time, and the thought of it stirred something deep inside him. Clara moved toward the door, grabbing her coat from the hook by the entrance. Max jumped to his feet, eager to follow. He had learned the signs. The way Clara picked up her coat, the way she reached for his leash, the way her movements became purposeful when it was time to go outside. He wagged his tail excitedly, his paws shifting with anticipation. As she clipped the leash to his collar, Clara crouched down to meet Max's gaze. "We've been through a lot together, haven't we?" she said softly. "I think it's time for us to take a step forward together." Max gave a small bark, his tail wagging more vigorously now. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the emotion behind them. Clara wasn't just saying they were going for a walk. She was saying they were moving forward, taking a new step together beyond the walls of their home and into the world. With a gentle tug on the leash, Clara led Max outside. The cool morning air greeted them like an old friend, crisp and fresh, filled with the promise of something new. The world outside was just as Max remembered it, the soft crunch of snow beneath his paws, the scent of wet earth and pine trees, drifting in the air, and the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. As they walked through the neighborhood, Clara seemed lighter, more at ease than she had been in weeks. Her shoulders no longer carried the weight of whatever had been troubling her. She moved with purpose, and Max matched her stride, walking by her side, his senses fully engaged in the world around him. They passed familiar landmarks, the corner bakery, the park where Max had once chased squirrels, the small creek that ran behind the neighborhood. Each place held a memory, but today they felt different. They weren't just symbols of the past. They were part of the journey forward, part of the new path that Clara and Max were walking together. When they reached the edge of the park, Clara stopped. She looked down at Max, her smile wide. "You ready for a little fun?" Max's tail wagged furiously, and he gave a joyful bark. Fun. He was always ready for that. Clara unhooked his leash, and Max bolted forward, his paws kicking up snow as he ran. The cold air nipped at his fur, but it only made the experience more thrilling. He ran faster, his body a blur of motion as he weaved through the trees, his ears flapping in the wind. Clara watched him, laughing softly, as Max raced around the park. He felt free in a way he hadn't in a long time. The energy of the moment filled him, a reminder that life was not just about surviving, but about living, about embracing the simple joys that came with each new day. After a while, Max slowed to a stop, his breath coming in heavy puffs, his sides heaving. He trotted back to Clara, who was now sitting on a bench, watching him with a contented smile. She patted the space next to her, and Max immediately climbed up to sit beside her. Clara wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "I think this is the start of something good," she said softly. "We've both come so far, Max, and we're going to keep going together." Max leaned into her, his eyes closing for a moment as he allowed himself to relax. He didn't need to understand everything Clara said. He only needed to feel the steady, unwavering bond between them. The trust, the love, the quiet understanding that had formed over the past weeks. They sat there together for a while, watching the snowflakes fall gently around them. The world was peaceful, calm, and for the first time in a long while, Max felt a sense of contentment that he hadn't known before. He was home, not just in the house they shared, but in the heart of someone who loved him unconditionally. And in that moment, Max knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Max had learned many things since coming to live with Clara and her family. The house, once unfamiliar and intimidating, had become a place of comfort, a place where he was loved and cared for. His world, once confined to the narrow spaces of a shelter and the uncertain streets of his past, had expanded into a home filled with warmth and safety. And yet, despite everything he had gained, there was still something missing. A connection he hadn't fully formed, a bond that felt just out of reach. That connection was trust. Max had come to trust Clara, of course. Her gentle voice, her soft touch, her unyielding patience had taught him that he was safe. But there was one other piece of the puzzle: the children. In the beginning, Max had been wary of them. They were loud, full of energy, and unpredictable. They didn't move the way Clara did. They were fast, always running and jumping and making noise. Max had watched them cautiously from a distance, unsure of how to navigate their exuberance. But over time, something had shifted. The children had learned to respect his space, to approach him gently, and they had patiently waited for him to come around. And Max had slowly begun to trust them too. Today, Clara was busy in the kitchen, preparing lunch, while the children played in the living room. Max was lounging on his favorite spot by the window, the sun casting a warm golden light on his fur. He was content, listening to the sounds of laughter and the occasional shriek of excitement from the kids. But there was something different today, a new energy in the air. As Clara moved about the kitchen, she called to Max in a light, teasing voice, "Come on, Max, I need your help." Max's ears perked up at the sound of his name. He had learned that when Clara asked for his help, it was usually something fun, maybe a walk or a game of fetch. He padded into the kitchen, his paws light on the floor as he trotted toward her. Clara knelt down to meet him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I need you to keep an eye on the kids while I finish up in here," she said, her voice warm. "Can you do that for me?" Max wagged his tail in excitement. This was something new. He was used to the kids being around, but now it seemed like Clara was entrusting him with something important. It made him feel valued, like he had a role to play in the family, a protector, a companion. He glanced toward the living room, where the children were playing with their toys, and then back at Clara. His body language was clear. He was ready. He could do this. Clara smiled and gave him an affectionate pat on the head. "Good boy, Max." Max moved toward the living room, his tail held high as he watched the children. They were sprawled out on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals and books. Lily, the youngest, was stacking blocks, while Ethan, her older brother, was deep in the middle of a make-believe adventure. Max's protective instincts kicked in as he surveyed the scene. The children were happy, engaged in their play, but there was always a part of him that remained alert, watching over them. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose constantly sniffing the air. He didn't need to be asked to protect them. He did it instinctively, just as he had always done. Lily looked up and saw Max standing by the doorway. Her face lit up with a smile. "Max," she squealed, clapping her hands together. "Come play with me." Max's tail wagged, and he padded over to her. He sat down beside her, his large frame dwarfing the small stack of blocks she had built. Lily reached up and ran her small hand through his fur, giggling as he licked her face. Ethan, noticing the commotion, looked up from his game. "Can I ride Max?" he asked excitedly, his eyes wide with wonder. Max's ears perked up at the question, and he glanced toward Clara for approval. He knew she had always been cautious about the children riding on him, but today it seemed like she trusted him to make the right decision. Clara, who had been watching from the kitchen, gave him an encouraging nod. "Go ahead, Max. You know what to do." Max turned back to Ethan, his body language calm and accepting. He lowered himself to the ground, allowing Ethan to carefully climb onto his back. The boy's small hands gripped Max's fur, and Max could feel the weight settle onto his back. He had carried children before, but there was something different about this moment. It wasn't about the weight, it was about the trust. Ethan trusted him, just as Clara had. With a soft woof, Max stood, moving slowly at first to ensure that Ethan was secure. The boy laughed, his voice full of joy as Max trotted around the living room, his paws moving in a steady rhythm. The sensation of carrying Ethan was new, but it felt natural. Max's instincts guided him, keeping the boy safe. As they moved through the room, Lily, not to be left out, jumped up and ran to join them. "My turn!" she exclaimed, her tiny feet pattering on the floor. Max stopped, allowing her to climb onto his back as well. Now both children were on him, their laughter filling the room, and Max couldn't help but feel a surge of happiness. He had come a long way from the anxious dog he had once been. This moment was proof of that. As he walked around with the children on his back, Clara watched from the kitchen, her heart swelling with pride. She had known that Max was a special dog, but she had never imagined the depth of his loyalty and love. He wasn't just protecting her family, he was becoming an integral part of it. Max continued to carry the children, his steps steady and sure. The trust between them had deepened, and with each step, that bond grew stronger. It wasn't just about being a pet or a guardian. It was about being a member of the family, one who would always be there, through the good times and the challenges. By the time Clara finished preparing lunch, the children had exhausted their energy, and Max had completed his task with unwavering dedication. He returned to his spot by the window, his body tired but content. The afternoon light streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over him as he lay down to rest. Clara joined him a few moments later, her voice soft as she spoke to him. "You did a great job today, Max. I'm so proud of you." Max's tail gave a gentle thump against the floor in response, the sound like a soft promise of more moments like this. Moments of trust, moments of connection. In that quiet space, Max knew that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not just a home, but a family that had welcomed him with open arms and hearts full of love. And with every passing day, he grew more certain that this was exactly where he was meant to be. It was late in the evening, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind against the windows. Clara sat by the fire in the living room, a book in her lap, while Max lay at her feet, his eyes closed, his ears perked just slightly. The warmth of the fire made the room cozy, a comforting contrast to the cold, crisp night outside. For once, everything felt calm, no interruptions, no worries. The routine of their days had become a sanctuary, a rhythm that brought peace. But Max's instincts, honed over years of guarding, were never fully at rest. Even in these calm moments, he kept a part of himself alert, always ready, always watchful. It had been a long time since he had sensed any real danger, but the night seemed to hold a different energy, a quiet tension that he couldn't ignore. Clara noticed the change in him before she even saw it. Max's head lifted slightly, his eyes blinking open, his gaze sharp as he looked toward the window. His ears were now fully perked, his body tensing, though he remained still, waiting. "Max?" Clara asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. She could feel it too now. Something was different. Max didn't answer her, of course, but he didn't need to. He simply rose to his feet, his posture alert, and padded toward the door. His paws moved with purpose, each step measured, as though he knew something that Clara didn't. Clara followed him, her heart starting to race. She trusted Max with her life, and when he acted this way, she knew it was time to listen. She glanced out the window, but all she could see was the soft glow of the streetlights and the falling snow. "Max, what is it?" she whispered. Max turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment it was as if he was trying to communicate something deeper, something unspoken. Then, without another moment's hesitation, he stood at the door, his body tense, his tail held stiff. Clara hesitated, but she couldn't ignore the urgency in his stance. She opened the door slowly, Max stepping outside with a low, protective growl. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and biting, but she didn't think about it. She followed Max down the porch steps and into the yard. Max's nose twitched, his head low to the ground as he sniffed the air. He moved quickly, his paws making no sound against the snow-covered ground. Clara stayed close behind, trying to keep up, but feeling a strange unease creeping into her bones. Max led her to the far side of the property, where the woods began to thicken, the trees casting long shadows under the pale light of the moon. The world seemed unnaturally quiet here. The only sound, the crunch of snow underfoot. Then in the distance, Clara heard it, an unmistakable noise. A faint rustling in the underbrush, followed by a growl, low and threatening. Max's hackles rose. His body went rigid, and he stood between Clara and the sound, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the air grow heavier, the silence amplifying the tension. She didn't know what it was, but she knew Max did. He had been trained to protect, and she trusted him with her life. From the shadows, two glowing eyes appeared, reflecting the moonlight like twin lanterns. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the air, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. The silhouette of a coyote emerged from the trees, its fur matted and its eyes cold. Then another followed, and another. A pack. Max took a step forward, his body low to the ground, his growl deep and warning. His instincts were sharp, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for action. Clara could feel the tension radiating from him, and for a brief moment she realized how deeply she had come to rely on him. He wasn't just a pet, he was her protector, her guard, her partner in this life. The coyotes circled, their eyes fixed on the two of them. Max stood tall, his tail straight and rigid, his stance unyielding. He wasn't about to back down. "Stay behind me," Clara whispered, even though she knew Max didn't need the instruction. She could feel his loyalty in the air, the way his body aligned with hers, how his presence was a shield around her. The coyotes didn't back off, though. They were hungry, desperate, and they knew Max was the only thing standing between them and their prize. Max's growl intensified, a warning that they were too close, that this was his territory, his family. But the pack didn't listen. One of the coyotes lunged, its jaws snapping in the air. Max sprang into action. With a speed and power that Clara had never seen from him before, Max launched himself at the first coyote, his teeth bared and his body moving like a streak of lightning. The coyote yelped in surprise, but Max didn't give it a chance to recover. He twisted and snapped, forcing the animal back with a fierce snarl. The other coyotes circled closer, their growls becoming louder, but Max wasn't backing down. He was protecting Clara, protecting the home he had come to love, and nothing was going to make him stop. Clara stood frozen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She couldn't help Max in the way she wanted to. All she could do was watch, helpless, as Max defended them both with everything he had. The fight seemed to stretch on forever, though it was only moments. The coyotes, sensing they were outmatched by Max's sheer force and determination, began to retreat. Slowly, one by one, they faded back into the shadows, their glowing eyes disappearing into the night. Max stood tall, his body tense but unbroken. His eyes scanned the area, making sure the threat was truly gone. When he finally turned back to Clara, he was panting heavily, his sides heaving with exhaustion. Clara rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch him. "Max, you were incredible," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Max nuzzled her gently, his tail giving a soft wag as he leaned into her touch. He was tired, but he had done his job. He had protected her, just as he always would. As Clara looked down at him, she realized just how much trust had passed between them. Max had always been loyal, but tonight he had proven his devotion in ways she couldn't have imagined. He wasn't just her companion, he was her hero, and with that realization came a deep, unwavering certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Max and Clara would face them together. There was nothing they couldn't overcome, as long as they had each other. The night was still. The house stood quietly in the distance, a beacon of warmth against the cold. But Clara stood outside, her heart still racing, her eyes fixed on Max. He was by her side, his body slightly hunched with fatigue, but his stance still proud and alert. The danger had passed, but Clara could feel the weight of what had just happened. Max had faced off with a pack of coyotes for her, for them, and he had come out victorious. But the emotional toll of it lingered in the air between them. She reached out and gently scratched behind Max's ears the way he liked. His tail gave a slow, appreciative wag, though he remained watchful. He had done his duty, but there was no sign of relief in his eyes. There was only the deep, ingrained instinct that told him to remain vigilant. Clara finally broke the silence. "You saved us, Max. I don't even know how to thank you for what you just did." Max didn't need any words. He just leaned against her, his body strong and steady. It was his way of saying, "I'm here, I'll always be here." Clara's heart swelled with gratitude as she stood there with him. Max wasn't just the dog she had adopted. He had become part of her family, part of the fabric that held everything together. The bond between them, which had started as a quiet understanding, had now grown into something unbreakable, something that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. As they stood outside, Clara began to think about the years that had passed. Since Max first came into her life, she remembered the nervous, anxious dog who had cowered at every loud sound, the dog who had hesitated to trust anyone, let alone her. And now, here he was, standing beside her in the cold, having faced down a threat that would have frightened anyone else. It was more than she had ever hoped for. "I think we should go inside," Clara said softly, her voice gentle, but with the authority of someone who knew the battle had ended. "You've earned a rest." Max gave a small grunt of agreement and slowly followed her back to the house. As they entered the warmth of the living room, Clara glanced around. The children had gone to bed. The house was peaceful once again, and everything felt right. She could feel the tiredness in Max's body, but it wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the weight of the responsibility he carried as protector, as guardian. Clara knelt down beside him, her hands gentle on his head as she spoke to him, her voice full of love. "You've done so much for us, but now it's our turn to take care of you." Max looked up at her, his eyes soft and trusting. He lay down on the rug, curling into a comfortable position by the fireplace, where the warmth of the flames danced and crackled. Clara sat beside him, stroking his fur with a steady rhythm, watching as his eyes slowly closed, his breathing deepening as he relaxed. She had seen so many sides of Max over the years, his strength, his courage, his loyalty, but she had never realized just how deep that loyalty ran, how far he would go to protect the ones he loved. She knew that their bond had reached a new depth tonight, a level of trust and understanding that words couldn't fully express. As Max settled into sleep, Clara allowed herself a moment to reflect. It had been a long journey for both of them, from the first uncertain steps to this moment of absolute connection. She thought about how much he had taught her, not just about love, but about resilience, about facing challenges head-on, and about the importance of patience. They had both learned and they had both grown. The fire in the hearth crackled, and the wind outside howled gently, but inside, everything was still. The world beyond their door was cold and uncertain, but inside they were safe. Together. Max stirred in his sleep, his tail giving a soft thump against the floor, as if to remind Clara that even in rest, he was still ever watchful, ever loyal. She smiled softly as she continued to stroke his fur. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible but full of meaning. "For everything." Max's eyes fluttered open briefly, as if he had heard her words, and his tail gave another soft thump. He nudged her hand with his nose before closing his eyes once more, settling into the peaceful rest he so deeply deserved. And Clara, sitting beside him, knew that no matter what the future held, she would always have Max by her side. There would be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome. But now she understood that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't handle. Max was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her confidant, and her best friend. And tonight, he had shown her just how far his loyalty went, and Clara vowed that she would always protect him, as he had protected her. The days after the coyote attack were quieter. The snow had stopped falling, and the cold seemed less harsh, though winter's grip still held firm over the landscape. Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her home, a peace that was largely due to Max, whose protective presence had only grown stronger after the night of the attack. Max was still the same dog he had always been, loyal, loving, and fiercely. A protective, but something had shifted between them. The bond they shared had deepened in ways neither could have predicted. Max, the dog who had once been unsure of himself, now moved with more confidence. His eyes shone with quiet pride, and his stance was steady and assured. And Clara, in turn, had grown more aware of just how much Max had become part of her life, how much he meant to her. He was no longer just a pet. He was her family. He had shown her that true loyalty meant standing together no matter the circumstances. He had proven that love was not just a feeling. It was a commitment, a promise that stretched beyond the challenges they faced. The day after the attack, Clara took Max for a long walk through the property. The snow was packed down from the previous night's storm, and the crisp air was invigorating. Max trotted alongside her, his tail wagging in a relaxed manner, his ears flicking back in contentment. He had done his duty, and now the quiet calm of the day was his reward. Clara smiled as she glanced down at him. "You're something special, Max," she murmured. "I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for what you've done for me, for all of us." Max glanced up at her, his eyes soft, his body moving in a smooth rhythm beside hers. The words didn't need to be said aloud. He understood her just as much as she understood him. Their connection was beyond words, built on years of shared experiences, both hard and joyful. They reached the far edge of the property, where the woods began to thicken once again. Max stopped and lifted his nose to the air, his ears swiveling to catch every sound, every scent. His instincts were always sharp, but today there was a sense of tranquility about him, a sense that the world, for now, was at peace. Clara knelt down beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. The bond between them was stronger than it had ever been. In that moment, Clara realized that this life they shared was exactly where they were meant to be. "You've taught me so much, Max," she whispered. "And I'm so grateful. You're my hero." Max nudged her hand with his nose, his tail giving a soft thump as he lay down at her feet. For a moment, Clara simply sat there with him, her fingers gently stroking his fur. There was a peaceful quiet that enveloped them, the kind of quiet that only came after a storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of calm, a sense of renewal. As they sat together in the stillness, Clara realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had started with a rescue dog who needed her, but now she had a companion who had saved her in more ways than she could count. Max had given her a gift, one she could never repay. He had shown her the meaning of loyalty, of love, of resilience. He had shown her that the bond between them was not something that could be broken, no matter the circumstances. "I promise, Max," Clara said softly, her voice full of conviction. "I'll always take care of you. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Max gave a small sigh, his eyes closing in contentment. He trusted her, as he always had. The world could throw anything at them, but together they would face it. Together they had already faced so much. And they had come out stronger. As Clara stood up and began to walk back toward the house, Max followed at her side, his steps steady, his body moving with the ease of a dog who had found his place in the world. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the land, signaling the end of another day. The fire inside the house was already crackling, waiting for them to return. But Clara knew this was only the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where the bond they shared would continue to grow stronger, one where they would face whatever came their way side by side. Max wasn't just her protector anymore. He was her partner, her friend, her family. And as they walked back into the house together, Clara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. They had found each other, and no matter what the future held, that was all that mattered.